hope you're doing well. My name is Anahita Sen, and I'm a co-facilitator of the M&A Stories YouTube podcast, which is brought to you by Fifth Chrome Business Insights. Welcome to Season 3. The theme of this season is culture and its impact on M&A integration. Culture is one of the biggest challenges that face an M&A integration, and this challenge couldn't get any bigger as more companies are pursuing M&A based on people and culture. That is why it is important to understand, internalize, respect, and develop a clear plan of action on how to handle culture in M&A. In this season, we will be interviewing industry leaders from across the globe to hear their stories on how they address culture in an M&A integration. So here we go with today's episode.
Hi there, welcome to another episode of M&A Stories. My name is Anirvan Sen and I'm your host today. In today's episode, we have the privilege of having a very senior practitioner from one of the largest companies in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Kim Jones. Hey Kim, welcome to our show today. How are you?
Hey, good, thanks. It's great to be here. I always love kind of getting to talk about M&A and culture, so I appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Now, before we get into integration and culture, you have moved to a place which is kind of middle of nowhere. What's the story there, right?
Well, technically not the middle of nowhere, but moved to Fort Collins, Colorado, which is my hometown. And fortunately, I am a virtual worker. And so when my boyfriend's job relocated us back to Colorado from Washington, we decided to go for it. So it's nice to be home.
Awesome. And maybe for our viewers, what's the setup there? Is it cold there right now, or is it spring?
It's wacky. It's spring, and it snows, it's sunny, it rained, it's cold, but it's supposed to be 70 this weekend, which so very excited that spring is finally here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining our episode today. You have tons of experience in this space. So why don't we start first with a brief introduction of who you are, and then we're going to hear your perspective.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to give a little bit of background. Like currently, my role as an HR director, I specialize in M&A. So I've had the pleasure of doing acquisitions at various companies throughout my career. And in my current role, it's really nice they have a dedicated M&A team, so that that I can really focus on all the acquisitions that the company's doing. And my focus is leading the people strategies for transactions, where I have the opportunity to kind of influence and coach leaders on both sides to really think about how we drive deal value through engaging and retaining talent. And I'm very excited to talk about culture today, because definitely a self-proclaimed culture geek and always up for a good discussion on the importance of culture and how it can lead to growth and innovation and kind of some of the unique things that you experience in M&A with culture.
Brilliant. Why don't we start with your perspective on what you think culture is?
Oh, well, I think, yeah, it's complicated, but I think if I just boiled it down to a simple view,
Sure.
To me, it's really how people in the organization believe and act. And I think this shows up in company values, the perks that get set up, work habits, communications to decision making, and anything also to like the physical space, to virtual, to kind of how employees and leaders engage with employees in that manner,
Right.
too.
Awesome. And the other thing, of course, is you've worked with a number of companies, and you've also been on the side of buying, and you've acquired lots of companies, all shapes and sizes. So it's going to be an interesting discussion.
Yes. Yeah, I think I was trying to just think back of how many I'd done over my career at different companies, and it's definitely over 30, and it does range in size and industry and type, from small startups to merging public companies to divestitures. So I think definitely some good stories and insights on how we navigated the culture and where it worked and where it didn't. So we can
Sure.
talk through any of that too.
Awesome. So, I'm dying to get into the details here, right? So, and again, it's always for a conversation starter, an icebreaker. We always want to hear a negative story first, and then how it builds up and goes to a positive story, right? So maybe share one of your experiences where it really went pear-shaped?
Yeah, you're right, because it can go either way, and it's so complex. Well, about 15 years ago, I worked with a company that we were starting to acquire a lot of different types of businesses to kind of
Sure.
fill out the technology side of things. And we did a big global acquisition with a Korea team. We were based in the US, Pacific
Right.
Northwest, purchased a team in Korea, and then the next acquisition was based in Austria.
Oh, wow.
So we had a US team bringing together people in Korea and Austria, and we had sent a technical team from Korea over to Austria to kind of help set it up.
Right.
And just, it was really interesting, kind of the differences of how work got done, the hierarchical cultures, and like even just how the teams work together. Like the Korean team wanted to have lunch together versus like, the efficiency of having lunch at your desk. So small things like that. And it was just really challenging to navigate those differences and really pause to see why productivity was taking a hit, because we weren't addressing the different things that people needed to be able to be successful, feel successful,
Sure.
and just excited to work on like these challenging problems. So I would say that was definitely one where we learned a lot real time and made a bunch of mistakes of how we engaged with these different cultures, and made some assumptions, and it didn't work. And
Right.
it almost caused the demise of that business.
Gotcha. And was that the Korean business or the Austrian business?
It was probably more part of like what the US wanted to drive, but yeah, we
Right.
almost had to separate these businesses out again. Like it took other teams coming in and really kind of pausing to work through that to kind of get it even on track.
Sure, sure. And are you in a position to share any more details? And again, it's okay if you can't. Um, so what happened there that kind of, maybe an anecdote which says,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, I think like even with decisions that needed to be made, people were looking for leadership from like their home country. And
sure.
I think it was just, even as you look at that vision and alignment of what we're going to do and how we're going to do that wasn't there. And so people were kind of doing their own thing with the
Oh,
different
wow.
teams, and it wasn't accruing to the work that needed to be done to launch
Right.
something for our customers.
Right. Okay. Okay. Interesting. Interesting. And back then, did you realize that it was a cultural problem?
Yeah, I think I lived it, because traveling over there to even our team in Austria, you could start to see like just the disconnect. And
Right.
I think at that point in my career, like I hadn't really thought about how do we address this in a way that makes sense for the business and getting people's time and attention versus just trying to deliver product. So I think it took quite a bit of just stepping back, and as that team was growing too, as we were hiring, kind of bringing in different personalities and styles and like leader behaviors that were needed to bring people together versus keeping them separate. So I think in hindsight, it really taught me just to really look at then how do we bring this forward to leaders and show it as a business case,
Sure.
and really try to spend the time and invest the money to address it, which I think that's always kind of a hard thing to do.
Right. Right. Now, normally people don't necessarily get thrown in that kind of an integration straight away. Did he have like a nasty boss or something?
I think it was my own fault, because as the company that I worked for then didn't have a dedicated M&A team.
Right.
And so I've always been fascinated with how businesses work, how cultures come together. And so I volunteered.
Oh, okay.
And I really had no idea even the complexities of what it meant, like employment laws from a global standpoint, how they came together. And then really even, I mean, I knew cultures mattered, but how to kind of work that out in a way that made sense with the acquisition, the integration, and just the business leaders at the time.
Gotcha. Gotcha. What were, let's say, a couple of learning from those transactions that you still use in your current job?
Yeah, that it's not easy, that you really, even just learning more about each culture is super helpful in kind of whether it's tools. I mean, I think I heavily relied on GlobeSmart then of looking at, okay, how do these, what was really successful for somebody that works in a Korean-based company versus somebody that works in an Austria-based company, and I think I've taken that tone with me later on as I think about just how vast and lucky we are to be able to, like, companies that you can buy companies globally, and
Right.
just really even thinking through, like, okay, time zones to how people actually communicate. Do you get straight to the point? Do you actually have a nice lead in to build trust? What are those styles, and how do you do that in a way that feels more natural? And secondarily, like, really trying to push for this at the beginning,
Sure.
and really trying to figure out what's valuable to the target company and the current company, and how that can work together.
Right. Right. Now, I mean, there is obviously a difference in national cultures or regional cultures, right?
Mhm.
But were there also organizational cultural differences,
Oh,
meaning
yeah.
you guys were big, stable, command and control, driven through policies and procedures, whereas one of the other companies was highly entrepreneurial or innovative or something like that. Yeah.
I think in this case, it was almost the opposite of a company that was starting to grow, and
Okay.
more startup culture to then some of these more formalized bigger companies. So it was almost like you were buying more structure, and not used to that. And so then that was a definitely uh, something we didn't really analyze. But
Right.
now I probably experienced that more working in a big company, acquiring more startups, of how you get them to see the value of process tools and help people through some of those hurdles where it feels like it slows them down.
Sure, sure. Yeah, especially, the way some of the startups and scale-ups are oriented, for them, it's all about focus on the revenue, whereas the larger companies tend to look at the cost and the profitability and the efficiency and all of that stuff. Um,
Yeah,
how
and your
do
sales cycles are different, right? There's a lot of difference of how you sell things for in an enterprise versus a startup, and how you do contracts and all of that fun stuff too.
very absolutely, absolutely, very true. Now, if you remember, what were some of the let's say challenges that were there that you encountered with sort of the leadership team of the acquired company,
Mhm.
obviously, when they join in, there's always that honeymoon period, and then in some cases 2 days of honeymoon, in some cases 2 months of honeymoon, right?
Mhm.
But once that goes off, and the realization sets in, people react differently. What has been your experience in a couple of those scenarios?
Yeah, I think this is where getting in and really understanding and trying to get people past presenting a certain image of what they really want you to hear versus the reality.
Sure.
And I think that's been a good learning, because you have to get to that core. Like, you can't all of a sudden, like, the curtain comes up and, like, oh wait, what's behind it? You
Yeah.
know, and really just, so I think, like, what we've really tried to do is work some of these conversations into our DD process, and really spend the time to kind of get to know leaders, but push them on the honesty and transparency in a way that, no judgment, just need to
Sure.
know, so that we can really that we can come together and solve these problems, because it doesn't go away when you come into a bigger company, or it doesn't go away, like, or maybe you have a better way of dealing with it and we can help with that. So I think it's really kind of putting in those cadence of meetings and conversations to push on that is what I've found to be helpful.
I like it the way you put it, no judgment, because that's so important. It's people walk in, people go in, and the first thing they do is throw culture out of the window, no respect for culture, and that's can be such a killer of a transaction. So
Mhm.
I'm glad to hear that about no judgment. Now, unpacking that scene a bit, right? When you walk in and you have unpacked, you've observed some of the things that are there any patterns that some of the larger companies look for? When do you say, that this is absolutely not workable in your due diligence versus say, hey, you know what, we can work with it, but it's going to take a lot of effort versus it's going to be a walk in the park?
Yeah, I don't think I've been in a situation where we walked away from something because the cultures were different. It was really going through a process. And I think we're lucky because we do identify some of that early before like even the letter of intent or signing the deal stage. But
Sure.
it's but back to your question, it's how do we identify that of what's kind of the same and what's different beyond just like, oh, we have the same marketing materials for values and mission, but how do we kind of take that one step of like, how do people live it? And
Right.
then really even, I've done even a simple chart of like, here's how that team operates and here's how we do, and here's some areas that we really need to focus in on and prioritize that with the incoming leadership team, to kind of really work through that. I
Sure.
think the harder part, what you said is, sometimes you have 2 days, sometimes you have a month. That like M&A timelines are tight,
Right.
and it can be like, oh well, we'll deal with culture later.
Right.
So that's why we really tried to work it into part of our DD process to at least start that.
Okay.
Um, Identification, like working with leaders. Like one example is I had a company that we were acquiring that CEO never had a boss and was
Right.
coming into a large company that not only had a boss, but probably 20 other people the person had to influence. And as much as you can like identify that and do it on the part that I play, it was about 6 months later that leader came back to me that was managing this new team. Was like, I didn't realize how much work that was going to take. I know you told me, but not
Sure.
having going from not having a boss to then expectations on like an incoming leader
Right.
of like, oh well, you know what to do and like what I need from you. It's like it's just a different, identifying even those things, I think, to me is part of the culture of making it a success later. And that's where, but people have to be honest about it, right? That's
Sure.
that part of the transparency.
Yeah. I mean, you bring up a very interesting angle to the conversation about a lot of these companies, their CEOs, they never had a boss, right? And in some cases, they were the original founders. In other cases, they had other investors, but really they called the shots, right? My experience has been not a lot of them end up surviving in large companies for very long or for a length of time, and
Mm.
typically, um, even some of the earnouts, especially if the moment it goes beyond a year, becomes very difficult to materialize. What has been your experience?
It varies based on, I do think that the initial connection and the amount of time kind of investing and really understanding that person's situation. I mean, if somebody's a serial entrepreneur coming into a big company to see what they've developed scale, it
Right,
can be really exciting for some, but if they get to a certain point and they leave, we try to be very honest about that and identify that up front. But I've had leaders now that have come in from companies and are taking on bigger roles. And one of the things that we really did to kind of focus in on the CEOs, the leadership team, was create forums for people that were acquired to
sure,
come together to share their experiences, somewhat their frustrations, but
right,
also then to solve problems together about, well, how did you navigate the matrix? How did you like figure out how to influence, or what was really, when you thought somebody asked you something you thought was required, did you ask them, is that recommended or required? And sometimes it's not simple, but sometimes it's just these basic conversations that really
right.
help people.
Wow, I love that. I love that. Now, is the setting more like an Alcoholic Anonymous, or is that like a
Yeah.
boardroom setting?
No, we've done it a couple different ways where we
Right,
got people in person before the pandemic. We've
right,
done it virtual, and then actually one of our founders that came into the company now has like a forum where he gets all the acquired leaders together on a quarterly basis, and
right,
also wants them to solve problems together and kind of present like what they're learning as coming into the company of,
sure,
hey, this is really hard. Like
right,
we signed up for this, but it actually takes 9 months versus the 3 months you gave us.
right, right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And one of the things that I've also come across is quite often these CEOs, I mean, as you rightly pointed out, I mean, obviously they didn't have a boss, but not just that, one of the big struggles they go through is their ability to bubble up their ideas to the senior leadership, right?
Yeah.
Because they never had to acquire that skill in their previous job, right?
Mhm.
How do you map that skill gap? What are there specific interventions? Do you send them to Harvard or some other place, for some education? Is there a magic pill?
I don't think there's a magic pill outside of intentional time and effort and people really being conscious of that.
Right.
It just is, it's that influencing. And I think, as part of a larger company, we have training for leaders and managers that they can get some of that. But
Sure.
I think the hardest part of people coming in, especially CEOs and leaders, is they're used to being able to direct and just get the work done. And
Correct.
coming in, and they come with work. So I think that first even 6 months to a year is still at such a fast pace. It's hard to step back and think through those things. And so I
Right.
think that's really more on their manager and their
Yep.
leadership team to recognize it and spend some time. So that's why we try to partner people up. We try to do all of that, but at the end of the day, it does come down to that person's desires, how they want to approach it too. And hopefully, there's some good stuff, or we leave on good terms and then they go start another company that we can buy. I don't know. There's
Right.
always,
Oh yeah. Once an alumni, always an alumni, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Um, One more question
Okay.
regarding that leadership, which is typically what people say. Good leaders, they are able, when they're brought in, the first 3 months they spend is all about understanding sort of the new ways of doing things, but the real productivity starts actually happening in the new structure only after 3 months, and typically the break-even point is about 6 months from the day they started, right? And obviously it depends on it'll differ from leader to leader. What has been your experience? What's the life, what's the horizon, what's the time horizon by which these leaders actually get to full form or full potential of what's required of them through an acquisition?
That's a hard one to answer with just one.
Sure.
But and that it depends on the leader and their skills and capabilities and the team they came into.
Sure.
But just talking to some founders and leaders, over the course of the last few years,
Right.
I would say it took them even a year to 2 years to where they got to where they were stopping to fight the system, to realize the value and benefits of joining, influencing, sharing their frustrations, even, or sharing their ideas in different ways. And it's almost like you can see when they make that switch, it's less frustrating for them. And they don't think that the company is trying to hold them back. They're just trying to figure out how to do it, how to do what they do and bring forth the goodness and the agility, the innovation to a bigger company and teams. And that's not easy. I mean,
Oh yeah.
people, everybody's busy. There's certain ways to do work, but then you're acquiring companies that bring in new ways and new leadership. And it just takes time to figure that out. And the leader's ability to recognize that it's okay that they don't know how to do it, that
Right.
they're vulnerable, and that the way that they were working, they may have to change. And
Sure.
that's hard.
Right. 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 Now we understand leaders have their own challenges when they come in and join, right?
Yeah.
Um, but they're not the only ones who are working. There are also employees, and there are, developers, engineers. Rewards and recognition, especially going beyond the comp and ben.
Mhm.
It's about being recognized for the effort that you put in, right? Now, in smaller companies, there's a lot more pat on the back. You get a Starbucks voucher for
Yeah.
doing a good job, right? You try to do with any of the Fortune 500 companies, you have to get like 12 approvals, and then you have to go and speak with the Pope and say, yeah, okay, we can now recognize this
Yeah.
person. Um, how do you navigate that? How do you still keep people motivated, especially the incoming employees?
The nice thing about some larger companies too is there's a infrastructure that's
Mhm.
set up for that. And what I've seen teams dock into, whether they do just kudos boards, whether the manager and leaders are pushing to recognize that, people get called out in team meetings. I think all of those things still happen, but it goes back to how do you spend the time to really figure out what those teams and individuals value so that you
Sure.
can support it. The Starbucks card at lunch, especially I think in this macro environment, that's been challenging. So it's definitely been more, how do you focus on connections and really just talking to the individual to see like what they want to do and if there's ways that you can unblock that to do that. But it's so hard for, I think, acquired employees, especially at the beginning, because they're excited. They may have gotten a really great offer, some stock, some equity. They can see their vision scale. There's so much there. And then you hit all of these walls of procedures, process. Like we ask people to still deliver on things, but in a new language, whether that's tools, company, cadence, like all of that. And I think, so people kind of go through these dips and valleys, and
Sure.
it's really having the right support to pay attention to that. And I think, it works sometimes, and sometimes it's hard within everything else. So I think
Right.
it really, what I've seen at work is the teams that understand that that's going to need to be intentional, and they continue to work on it.
Right. You have worked quite a number of years with technology companies,
Mm-hmm.
and there are people in the technology companies who do not get inspired by financial rewards necessarily. They need to have something else.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share some examples of non-financial rewards or recognition that can be used effectively?
Yeah, some of it is when you think about even the technology, the engineers that develop the technology, and you're getting patents, and you see it go from 100,000 customers to 1 million plus. Like,
Right.
we really try to kind of encourage that. I think the balance, the careers, the trainings, all of those things that we have as tools for individuals, I think are super helpful, because you come in, you may have been not stuck in a 100% company. You may have
Sure.
only had certain things that you could do, but now you have a jungle gym of opportunity and different careers that you can really go drive and do. And I think, I feel like our company has done a great job with having those available so that people can customize it to what they value and what they appreciate.
Sure. Now, you've been quite active in the M&A community beyond your own company. What are some of the challenges that you see other companies struggle with when it comes to culture?
Oh, the same things we do. And just putting it into the front part. Like we talked about, the budgets, interest, and the M&A timeline is so tight. I think it's really hard to create it in the beginning that there's a case for investing in it and starting it now.
Right.
I think, being dedicated to M&A, we often hand off to others so we can start the process, but not necessarily finish it. And so I think companies struggle with that of how do they actually have, if they don't have a dedicated team, how do they go about doing this? How do they
Sure.
go about thinking about it? How do they resource it? How do they, really show the importance of spending the time to diagnose the cultures, kind of figure out the similarities, the differences, and then the value of bringing those together.
Gotcha. Are there any favorite tools or templates that you can share here?
We used to do like very formal stuff of like even like on bigger acquisitions, roundtable, like cultural roundtables, and really getting to know people, and they're facilitated, and a lot of work there. But I think with the agility that we've like had to kind of back to, it's more we put it into our DD process of having conversations of or deep dives of we spend as we're learning about the talent, really spending the first hour hearing from the target, hey, what's your culture about? What do you value? How do you bring that to life? And then
Sure.
vice versa. So it's no template per se, but we found
Right.
that really works. And then we also have different ways, and depending on the amount of resourcing that we
Sure.
have at the time, or the amount of deals, is to, if the target if we know the target well and
Yeah.
we've worked with them, we can spend time with leaders kind of walking through that. The other thing we do is just try to then do piecemeal interviews with talent as we get to the ability to kind of engage and kind
Right.
of just really create those charts of what's similar and what's different. So,
Sure.
and then of course we've had some times where we've been able to have budget to do the full analysis, but I have to say even the working it into the DD process in those conversations and making it a part of the integration process where everybody's looking at it. It's not
Right.
just run by HR because we don't own culture. Everybody
Sure.
does.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how we share like the interactions, how we share like, well, how did that land? How are they leading through that? Those conversations, even within the integration team, I feel like are invaluable.
Right. Right. Now, two questions at this stage. So one is, do you have variation? I'm sure you have variations of questions between the size of the companies, right? So, for example, it's a real sort of startup scale up, you may have a different set of DD questions compared to some of the larger. Any specific difference in asking questions about culture? So that's one. And the second is around the actual cultural assessment. Is that kind of hidden into the normal interview question, saying, hey, can you share your financial numbers? And the way the person behaves while sharing the financial numbers, you draw some conclusion based on that? Or do you actually have exclusive cultural interview session saying, this is going to be a cultural interview and these are the questions you're going to ask?
Yeah, going to your first question of what's similar or different,
Yeah.
like our org deep dive, we really try to keep fairly similar of the questions. It may play out differently of how like a startup versus somebody that's been 20 years running a company thinks
Sure.
about how they organize it, how they present. I would say, can you remind me of the second question?
Yeah, the second question
I don't
is,
remember it, but
yeah, it's about the cultural assessment, right? So
okay.
you have exclusive stakeholder interviews or interviews where you say we're going to do a cultural assessment based on this interview, or is it kind of folded in other questions?
It does vary, which I know that's a common thing to say, but based on what's our timeline for the deal,
Sure.
and how much investment do we have and resources to do that? And then if it's going to be a fully integrated deal, the teams do culture conversations ongoing, and so they get looped into that. So there's some of that as far as assessing that way. And then the only other thing that we do is some pulse surveys with the
Right.
teams to kind of get a sense for how they're feeling about things. And there's some culture questions weaved in there, but I don't think it's hidden. I just think of the pace of and number of acquisitions we've done over the past like 2 years, it hasn't been overt with the assessments to that level, but
Gotcha.
we do it in ways where we can.
Right. Gotcha. No, that's perfectly understandable. I was just looking at the watch, the clock. It's the time just flies. So we're kind of getting into the last part of the conversation. Any favorite business books that you would like to share with our audience?
Well, of course, I love Clint Kendrick's books, and I know he's a big contributor to the M&A community, and he has one on just get this right, the HR practitioner's guide to culture integrations. And I think stuff like that just resonate with me. Some other business books that I base a lot of things on are The Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck. But lately I feel like I'm more of a podcast like snippets kind of person with just the pace of work lately. So I haven't read any additional books, business books.
Sure.
At the end of the day or the weekend, sometimes I just need a break from that.
Right. No, absolutely. And podcasts are such rich sources of information, insights, especially. And I, typically love I call them the commute time, which is essentially 40 minutes, podcast. I just love them because there's one person being interviewed, they share their insights, and it's brilliant. Yeah. So I can understand.
And working virtual or from home, I try to then go for walks and do that.
Absolutely. On that front, agree that that's one similarity between the two of us, because I literally love going for long walks and use this. So
Yeah.
brilliant, brilliant.
Yeah.
A couple of questions, rapid fire questions. What's
Okay.
the nastiest thing that you've seen in an integration?
You said the nastiest thing?
Yes.
Oh,
Or
I
really
don't.
something really bad, something you just hated it when it happened.
I I think it's the acquiring a team that comes with leaders I don't believe in their style.
Right.
So I've seen that happen, and to me that just sets the wrong tone from the beginning, and then that it's set up to fail.
Sure. Sure.
So I think the nastiest thing I've probably seen is just those behaviors out
I
hitting.
I can imagine. I can imagine. Have you seen something that's been really inspirational, and you still carry it with you?
Yeah, there's a few things like you
Sure.
just have me thinking of all like those good feels that you get from acquisitions. Recently we purchased a company that came with such a strong leadership team. They were connected, and they were so connected into my company leaders, and being able to go to an employee announce and see the excitement of a team that normally is very reserved, and they clapped and they were so excited about the opportunity and
Right.
just what they could do, and just like then their hard work paying off. To me, like I'd love that. I'd love the stories of like the individual stories of that.
Sure.
So I think, I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, it
those are
does. Actually, that majority of the times, incoming employees are scared. I didn't want to use the S word, but they're really scared
yeah,
about their jobs, and if you can say or do something that can really get them inspired or motivated, and the fact that they clapped, means that I think that's a big achievement.
yeah. And you just sparked something too, I think, back on the side that doesn't work. I've actually been a part of, which is it's still gut wrenching, of where you tell employees something changes in the business, and it feels like it's a bait and switch. So I
Right,
think that's the other thing that is really hard sometimes in M&A, because things move so fast.
right.
But otherwise, I have probably more of those good stories or silly stories that
Sure.
that just make M&A like interesting and fun.
Right, right. Excellent. And last question, this rapid fire. Something that you see practitioners do quite often, but you don't agree with
In regards to culture,
in regards to culture or M&A integration, something that you would say the practitioners did less of.
assuming people will just adapt to your way of doing things.
I love
Like
it.
you're now part of our company, so you be this way. It's like telling somebody to be hungry. Although if you did tell me that, I'd probably go get a snack. But it's just I think that's just an assumption that people will just adapt and they'll just work through it. It makes it a lot harder to realize deal value and have that integrate acquisition be a success.
Yeah, yeah, I absolutely can relate to that, because literally, I mean, this takes me back a good few years. This company that got acquired, they got somebody from outside who came in and did a session on values, mission, vision statement, purpose, and that's it. And I'm like, how do you expect these
Yeah,
guys to do you expect them to switch off and switch
yeah,
on to the new ways? They're
yeah,
not robots, right? So,
yeah. I would
well,
agree with
you
that.
know what? This has been such a pleasure, Kim, to have this conversation with you. I'm sure we'll be speaking more, and we'll see you more often in our podcast. But thank you so much. There's a lot that we learned from you. So thank you for joining us today.
Great. Well, no, I appreciate you as well. Like it's always a pleasure to kind of have these conversations, and just it brings up so many memories of what works and what doesn't, and all the little cultural fun things that have happened. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it.
Brilliant, brilliant. And for the audience, this is what we had to share with you today. I hope you guys also learned and enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. So, with that, I would say bye bye. And till next time, here's to promise of a winning culture.
I love that.
Did you like today's content? If yes, then don't forget to hit the like button. If you heard something interesting, then don't forget to share it with your network and friends. And last but not least, please support us on this journey to spread awareness on topics related to M&A and integration by subscribing to our channel. That's all for now. Stay healthy and see you next time.
And if you like this session, I'm sure you'll also like our latest new tool. It is a quick assessment scorecard to assess the robustness of your culture integration capabilities in M&A. It just takes less than 5 minutes to answer. It is for free and you get instantaneous assessment. So visit culturema.scoreapp.com. That's culturema.scoreapp.com and find out for yourself.